Well, it's been a long time since somebody's made me laugh for laughable reasons since December 21. And thank God the joke is on me. I don't think of myself as short anymore. I guess my high heel shoes fool me, but in truth, I have to rise to my total 5'4.25" this afternoon. But really and truly, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity, even though terrified by it, to speak to you about the things that I've been working on, some of the things that I've been working on. I have spent my entire life working on really one problem, and this is the problem of why it is that in a country that is so resource rich, but so few people, why is it I still have to pass by and see children selling limes in the market? Why is it I have to read the paper about people who are, so many people who are still unable to live the kinds of lives of dignity without want? Why is it I still encounter students, young students, primary school students at university, who are coming to university struggling in this country that is so resource rich? I've spent my entire life working on this problem. And so a lot of what I've written about is basically about this. I said I was terrified because really and truly I write about my work. I don't speak much about my work. And in recent times I've been thinking that maybe I should start speaking about my work, but my work is radical work. And so I have to stick to the script sometimes before I get into some trouble. But I wanted to, this afternoon, I named my talk, I See a New Land, but Can We Get There? And before December 21, I didn't have the second part in. It was just I see a green land, and I was going to describe my vision. But now I am beginning to rethink all of what I'm seeing and what I've been thinking about. So, first of all, I want to kind of locate what I'm talking about, which is social cohesion. And I don't like that term because it is fraught with all kinds of definitional problems, but I understand that it is really, I understand the gesture to what, to those who have created it and created the ministry. So I'm not going to get into the definitional problems that it creates for a person like me, who tends to overthink things sometimes. But really and truly, the Green State Development Strategy, which actually does have social cohesion and inclusion as the first of its 6 principles, at least the version that I've seen. It may have changed somewhat since I got this version. So there is an intention, and there's always been an intention by the people of this country and by governments, sometimes more foregrounded than not, to actually deal with the problem that we believe is at the core of our arrested development. So I want to read for you, because I don't know how many people have encountered the vision statement of the GSDS strategy. I have to tell you that had I not been asked to do this, I may not have encountered it and may not have studied it. But I was really happy to have the opportunity. Let me read it for you. The vision is a green, inclusive, and prosperous Guyana that provides a good life for all its citizens based on a sound education and social protection, low carbon, resilient development, green and decent jobs, economic opportunities, individual equality, justice, and political empowerment. Wonderful vision, right? But the question is, how do we get there? and is it possible to do so? So the the 6 principles that GSDS espouses are social cohesion, 1, well-being and education, sustainable biodiversity and resource efficiency, decarbonization and climate resilience, sustainable finance and investments, and good governance. My work really is focused upon 3 of those: social cohesion and inclusion, well-being and education, and good governance. And so in the few minutes that I have this afternoon, I want to talk to you about some research that we actually have done in the country and what the country, you are telling us about what you want to see and how you want to see this done. So human capital refers to the production factors coming from human beings that we use to create goods and services. And so they include our knowledge, skills, habits, social and personality attributes, which is, I'm a social scientist, a behavioral scientist, so that's where my work is going to focus. And all of these form part of the human capital that contributes to the creation of goods and services. The concept of social cohesion is rooted in a long history of philosophy. I'm not going to go into that because I have a few minutes, but you can read. But basically, I am thinking about 3 things. The work of Chan, Green, and Ackett, recent work in the 19 to 20,000s, who account for such things as plurality, globalization, and technological advances. And these ideas are very important to the work that I will speak to you about today. In 2016, I was asked to join a team of researchers that had already begun to do work in Guyana, trying to understand what it is that Guyanese felt about being Guyanese, and how that played into public participation, how it played into civic engagement, and how it played into national development in general. The problem that I came in to fix, in a certain sense, and I tried to fix it with a kind of innovative methodology, which was my interest actually, just to test out this thing that I had in my head, was that the particular agency that was doing the work and the researcher that was doing the work was doing face-to-face consultations, and they couldn't get young people to talk to them, and they couldn't get older people to talk to them, and they couldn't get people of a particular ethnic persuasion to talk to them. And my argument was that you can't create strategy based on this kind of biased response to data. So my job was to try and find a way to reach young people, shut-ins, women in certain communities, certain ethnicities, who would not normally respond. I did this in 2 ways. We basically used radio to reach a number of people who were not going to write, who were not going to leave their homes, who were old. So I was working with 2 poles, very old people and young people, right? So the middle was catered for by someone else. And I went online, not I, but my researchers. I always work with students because I think it's really important for them to understand and to apply what we teach to what they do and what we do. So we set up a page, and this project was called the Unity Project. There may be some people in the room who actually went on that page and shared their ideas about various things. I don't know who the people were because I need to be 2 steps away from any data collection so that I can analyze without bias. So the data was collected by the students and a tag was put onto the names every respondent, so I didn't know the names. And basically we asked people 4 questions. What was the barrier to your feeling connected as a Guyanese? Were there any barriers? What kinds of things do you believe stopped you from being more engaged as a Guyanese? 2, what were the things that concerned you about Guyana? What are the things that make you feel as if you don't want to stay in Guyana to develop Guyana? 3, what were the things that would help you to have trust in the system? And 4, what are the things that you consider to be of most importance to you in terms of security? I want to make a point about this idea of cohesion that I think must be made if we are going to really think about things in a nuanced way. Because I think a lot of times we use terms and really don't think too much about unpacking them and about what they really mean and how they relate to other concepts in the field. So for instance, there's a difference between cohesion, solidarity, and integration. And I introduced these terms at this point because in analyzing the responses that people gave us, I believe it's important for you as a thinking audience and an interacting audience, I hope, to think about where we might be in Guyana in terms of these definitions and how they relate to each other. So for instance, solidarity would be the first step in which different groups who are interdependent recognize the need for collaboration on certain generally transactional aspects of their lives. Solidarity, I'm going to read it again, would be the first step in which different groups who are interdependent recognize the need for collaboration on certain generally transactional aspects of their lives. So transactional is really the least engaging or engage, right? So you have to do business, you have to buy bread in the market, you have to take a taxi, you have to do something, but we're not inviting that person to our house, they're not marrying our daughter, we're not, kind of legitimizing that or deepening that relationship. So think about Guyana and the Guyana we live and see if you can recognize this. The second one would be integration. So integration is when relations between distinct parts of a society are intentionally and systematically structured to relate in a peaceful and pragmatic way. So we still have these distinct parts, but they are intentionally structured to relate in peaceful and pragmatic ways. And those of us who study this area understand that there have been some times and some policies in this country, for instance, where people have in fact intentionally designed villages, for instance. If you look at the design of certain villages on the East Coast, right? You might see one village with this kind of ethnicity and next one with another predominantly. That's changing now. And we might wonder if actually that was a distinct design and a thought process that took place some time ago for people to try and integrate people in this kind of politically decisive way, right? And then finally, cohesion, which is the one we're trying to aim for, and I guess this would be the ideal, is the sum total of all of society's different parts acting together as one for an agreed greater common good. So cohesion, the sum total of all of society's different parts acting together as one for an agreed common good. So while the first two speak to interactions between only specific parts of a system in particular context, the latter seeks a deeper and more pervasive unification. It may be an ideal which is difficult to actually achieve, and it's true, it is, in ethnically diverse societies. And of course, Guyana is ethnically diverse. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That is actually a beautiful thing, if you can make it work for you. So, we have in this country, and I will argue for the Douglas and the mixed and so on, I would say 7. Some people say 6. We could say 8, I don't know. Because, some of the work I've done, I've heard people use terms like chinois, right? And Bufian and all kinds of things to kind of differentiate between that mix. So that's a whole can of worms. I'm not going to go there. But the truth of the matter is we are beautiful, diverse people, and that is what diversity does, if you can make it work for you. So we have 4 major international ethnic populations, right? So we have a lot of Chinese here, right? We have now with a lot of Europeans coming in. We have Latinos now, and we have a lot of Venezuelans, Colombians, and so on, and of course we have Caribbean people. So we are even getting ready to be more diverse, and this complexity is quite fascinating, but also worrisome in many regards. Because if we as Guyanese cannot work out this relationship, while we're going to face all these pressures at this point, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to survive in that. We don't have the numbers internally anyway, so we have to figure it out. So we have a definition of social cohesion as the constructive coexistence, this is my definition, by the way, the constructive coexistence of individuals who differ, and this encompasses a society's ability to secure respect for human dignity with due regard for diversity, personal and collective autonomy. So here we have people, when you talk to them about cohesion, I have a particular uncle of mine who thinks that the answer is to Douglarize everybody, and of course that's impossible because, that's only a certain mix. If you go by the strict definition, that's not the thing. The thing is that we need to have respect for each other and respect how that whole works in their own way, right? So it can be argued that the problem of cohesion characterizes unwillingness to integrate between ethnic groups, and by eruptions of racial animosity and violence at times, have been the major challenge to Guyana's development in over 50 years of its independence. I argue that. I believe there's a lot of credence in that, and I'm not the only one. There are a number of Guyanese scholars, excellent scholars who came long before me, whose work we draw on, who've dealt with this problem. I'm not the only one, but I'm dealing with it in a particular kind of a way now. So now you see why the framers of the Green State Development Strategy may have considered that social cohesion, well-being, and good governance were essential to what is termed a good life for all. I'm going to go back to, I wish I had brought something to show you a diagram, but I want to talk about a specific chain of events. What is a syndrome, or you go wrong and wrong doing the same thing over and over, right? The syndromic response to issues that Guyana has, and why I think that this is a key variable that we have to fix in our going forward. Consider this. So you start with divisive politics that overrides pragmatic politics. Political blocs have historically organized around ethnicity and not around common social and economic needs and interests. There have been times when this was not the case, and I do not want us to go away believing, and I certainly don't want to propagate the idea that this has always been the case. I work on an archive, and I've been very privileged to do this, and that's why I think I must be optimistic about Guyana so much. An archive that was created, a newspaper called The Creole. It was created in 1846. It was the second newspaper that freed people in Guyana, Africans and Creoles, that's why they call it the Creole, created after slavery was abolished in 1838. So think about that, right? A few years later, you have these people creating a newspaper, and the reason why I was attracted to the newspaper was not because it was created at that time. It was because with very few interruptions, it lasted from 1846 to 1907. And so, if you were able to work on an archive and have access to a paper like that, you get a very rare glimpse into the development of Guyana's political and social history that few other people have. And I have held in my hands, I have it somewhere in a box at home, a copy of it, the first advertisement for a political rally in this country in which they were calling together Indians and Africans to deal with the problem of universal adult suffrage, right? Because nobody of color could vote. You couldn't be on anything that was a that created policy or made decisions if you were of color, and they didn't care what color you were. So there have been times where historically we have seen political and social action that has resulted in something important for the country. So I don't want to say that it has never happened, but in recent times, what we've been seeing is these political blocs. Then we see the allocation of power derived through political means that have driven resource allocation largely along the same fault lines. And this will produce distinctly unequal material and social development. This leads to relative deprivation, and relative deprivation is really the way people feel when they compare what they get against what other people get. So they feel as if they're being deprived, others are getting more than them, and they all deserve the same thing. So you have these feelings of relative deprivation, which people call marginalization in this country, which arises in such conditions and fosters further resentment between groups and widens historical, social, and political fissures. And this leads to, 4, a dissipated political energy, diluted civic action, and reduced effort on social and national goals and interests. In other words, any national interest is subordinated to narrow personal and political ones. And the bottom line is, while certain power blocks progress, the country as a whole does not. I think we could recognize this, right, as probably true. It is no wonder that some attention to the question of national unity in Guyana, framed nowadays as social cohesion, has deservedly received attention from time to time, depending on the priorities of the government of the day. So there are a couple of dimensions of social cohesion that I want to break out, because when you think about it, it's like a big concept, and like nobody really knows exactly what it really means, what it entails, like amorphous thing. So the literature is kind of coalescing around at least 6 dimensions that are distinguishable at least. These are social relations, identification with a group or a cause, orientation towards the common good, shared values, a good quality of life, and equality. So for cohesion to be present, you need to have good social relations, peaceful, respectful, inclusive, identification with the whole, a national goal that everybody is agreeing with, orientation towards the common good, so we care about everybody, not only those people that we identify with or we think we look like, or for whatever reason we are being involved with more than others. So we have to care about everybody. Good shared values. So what does it mean to be a Guyanese? It's very interesting to hear what people tell you when you ask that question, but as another talk, let me focus on what I'm doing now. And equality, or equity as I like to call. Well, it's not the same thing, but I would like to say equity, right? And these dimensions are grouped on the 3 domains, if you will: ideational, relational, and distributive. So ideational, what are we thinking about? What are our attitudes, what are our thoughts, our cognitions about the thing? Relational, how are we relating in the space around ideas? And distributive, how are resources managed and distributed in the country? And so, in closing, because I have a very short space of time, and I can, of course, she said short, people like to talk a lot, but I want to be respectful of time. It's not that I like to talk a lot at all, it's just that I have so much to talk about sometimes, especially in this area, but I'm going to focus. There are a couple of things that the research, as I said, the research that was done was huge, several 100,000 respondents, because we looked at we allowed diaspora to respond online. We did radio calls, And then, of course, there was the face-to-face set that I didn't do, that another researcher did. So it was a big report, and I only have a few minutes, but I want to talk about what we generally found, because one of the questions that people ask, and we seem to just talk around it, is, do Guyanese really want to live together? Do we really, really want to live together, or do we want to split off into 3 different counties, or some party is kind of coming up with that idea. And I'm not in the party or any party, I'm not a politician, but I just wondered why they thought that might have been a good position to take. And so let's see what Guyanese people thought, right? So remember I just said that there were 3 domains that cohesion ideas or cohesion action or cohesiveness might actually fall into. And one was ideational, the thoughts that people have, and the other one was distributive, and the other one was relational, right? So guess what most of the people in the country wanted to talk about. And this, remember, is not now. This was done in 2016, 2017, right? Which one of those domains you think most of the responses kind of responded to? The distribution, right? There you go. All of you are, I dub you professors. That's not how I got my professorship, by the way. That's just, in case somebody wants to say that. Okay, so yes, distributive, right? So let me read now. Most people were concerned about how resources were allocated and managed in Guyana. And this was in 2016, 2017, not now. I'm sure we'd see a lot more of this now. They saw these as unequal and directly related to other issues as personal well-being, that's their personal well-being, community well-being, participation, and security. On the ideational side, people expressed pride in being Guyanese and noted the ability of Guyanese to live together in peace, despite their diversity. And diversity was articulated as difference, and that's a whole thing that we could discuss, but I'm not going to go there now. However, politics is identified as a key driver of tensions which exploit perceived differences. Peace and unity in Guyana is thought to be attainable through universal social justice, responsible leadership, and good governance. In the relational domain, Guyanese in this study indicated that there needs to be much more respect for diversity in all its forms. There was a lot of discussion on religious tolerance, and many saw the religious organizations as a good entry point for work in this area. Social inclusion is seen as a way to remove disparities which are noted between urban, rural, males and females, class and ethnic lines. Building trust is a major trope, but a major idea emerging from the discussion as well. This is linked to concerns about crime, the failure of protective systems, and those in authority to help secure the nation. Clear communication of governmental plans, inclusive consultation, clear and constant communication, and community and personal responsibility are seen as ways in which good relationships can be built and maintained in Guyana. So that is generally what that data said. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about what the section on equal rights and justice basically threw up, what we saw. The main ideas evolving from the discussion on equality, parity, and equity, parity, and equality hinged around fair application of the law, fair distribution of resources, and inclusion at all levels. 6 main dimensions for actions were identified: social and political inequalities, economic and material inequalities, such as allocation of resources, gender-related inequalities, the lack of trust, comes back again, individual health and well-being, and perceived governmental actions. The general perception emerging from the discussions, both on Facebook and radio, is that there is very little equality experienced in Guyana. This is driven by perceived inequalities in power, resource allocation, and access to opportunity. These perceptions pose fundamental challenges to cohesion since they undermine trust and tend to set groups competitively against each other, perceptually, at least for scarce resources. Who gets and who does not get is perceived to be related to the alignment of political or other power asset bases in the country. If these ideas and our lived experiences persist, then the prognosis for cohesiveness in Guyana could be very poor. However, if efforts are made to undermine these persistent inequalities in an equitable and transparent manner, coupled with efforts to control racially charged rhetoric, fear-mongering, and to foster respect amongst diverse groups in the country, the outlook could be positive in terms of cohesion. Gender relations and women's rights is also an emerging theme, where some young males, and this is interesting, some young males have begun to perceive that their rights are not being upheld as well as those of women, especially when they have to face the courts in the country in domestic matters. Now, we have to investigate that a little bit to see if that's a perception or if it's really so. And if it is so, then we need to do something about it. The lack of trust. This aligns to many general comments that point to the lack of trust in governmental organizations and other organizations which are expected to provide protection. Those include some which bring wrongdoers to justice by dealing fairly with all cases of wrongdoing, which must bring wrongdoers to justice with dealing fairly with cases of wrongdoing. For those who may not wish to resort to other informal types of redress, there could be learned helplessness and hopelessness, which creeps in, affecting mental health and general feelings of well-being. Compromised health has an impact on productivity, interpersonal as well as intergroup relations. It is especially problematic if it is perceived that wrongdoing is being perpetuated by members of one group against members of another, with no avenues for justice and fairness to redress. It is also perceived by a large number of respondents that government policies are not being clearly and systematically articulated. Finally, pride in citizenship. There's a great pride at being Guyanese, but this is juxtaposed with the tension sometimes felt of living in conditions which do not seem to support the best life that Guyanese could have. Questions arise in the discussions about how poor people reconciled their lived experience with the need with formal and informal information about the amount of wealth Guyana has or expects to have soon. This is a big issue. And I think that from this platform, the articulation of the gap between saying we're going to have so much or we have so much, and why some people live in conditions where they have so little, has to be filled and has to be explained. And there's an explanation, right? So that is something that we really need to focus on as a country, especially as 2020 and the impending oil boom supposed to be, we're supposed to feel that, right? So questions arose in the discussions about how poor people reconcile their lived experiences of need with formal and informal information about the amount of wealth Guyana has or expects to have soon. There is general wondering and concern about how everyone's portion will be allotted and the mechanisms of how this will be achieved. Community. Ideations of community emerge most frequently in this context. Many people see the community as a site for a local action in an environment enabled by policymakers and government. They see the role of citizens as that of helping to keep the law and order of the country. However, this must be enabled by the level of communities through such mechanisms as properly resourced and waged police forces and other persons in the community. Strengthened and interconnected community policing groups with police outposts, coupled with army support for police and arming of selected persons in communities was also suggested. And other vibrant community projects are also inclusive and encouraging, will also help. Participation. While the degree of public and civic participation varies in any system, the underlying reasons for why people participate or do not participate should always be addressed. Participation in public life is a good measure of a sense of connectedness, belonging, solidarity, and readiness. And this, of course, is important for achieving mutually set goals. Participants in this exercise seem to suggest that there's need for more opportunities for addressing problems in the system. As such, a highly competitive and complex political context, citizens seem to get caught between competing representations of reality, which in turn can undermine their sense of connectedness to the country and to one system in favor of another. This can also undermine their sense of safety, citizenship, and can impede their own opportunity-seeking efforts, which cuts them off from resources that might be available to them in the country. So sometimes it's not that resources are not there and opportunities are not there. People just don't seek them because they perceive right up front that it's not going to be available to them. It's only available for certain types of people. And so this is an issue that has to be addressed as well. So I am going to close here because I think I was supposed to speak for 20 minutes, and they've been very kind and not told me anything about that. But I really hope that what I've said has at least given you some idea about what Guyanese are thinking about why cohesion is really important to the national good, how we might think about cohesion, what are some of the aspects, dimensions of cohesion that we might think about, and really what your role as a Guyanese is. Because, you know, anybody can write any policy, we can do any research, but it's really about the way in which you choose to live your lives, and we all choose to live our lives. A couple of years ago, I saw a beautiful sight when I was just by accident one morning, and it sparked a project which we called, what do we call the project? It was a photography project. Oh, Guyanese, the way we love. Guyana, the way we love, a photography project. I was driving, taking my children to school one morning, and it started to rain. So there was this young Indo-Guyanese girl, and I'm sorry because I really hate to say Indo and Afro and I don't know, all these Guyanese, we're Guyanese, so, but of Indian descent and one of African, and one, they were walking across two separate sides of the road, and the rain came down, and one of them took out an umbrella, and the other one walked across the street, and they went happily down the street, right, never seen each other before, but they were sharing an umbrella. And that touched my heart, and I thought to myself, this is the way that Guyanese live on a day-to-day basis until we introduce some idea of something that has to be, some scarce resource that has to be shared, right? And then we start to think about, okay, who should get more and who should get less. That project started the photo competition, which we called Guyana the Way We Loved. And I asked people to send in photographs of just things like that they saw randomly on a daily basis. Because this is how you get to understand yourselves in a different way. This is how we get to being a nation, one people, one nation, with one destiny. And this is, with all my heart, what I've worked my whole life to see, and what I'd really like to see. Thank you very much.